Mike, we okay?
All right. Yeah, we're good. We're good.
There are 4 ways that book authors make money from book publishers. One is advances. Second is royalties. The third is the sale of certain what are called subsidiary rights. And the fourth is the one we all hope and pray for, which is getting the book on the New York Times bestseller list and getting what are called bestseller bonuses. So again, advances, royalties, sale of certain subsidiary rights, and bestseller bonuses. So I'm going to talk about how each of those 4 things is computed, as we said, or for lack of a better word, by a book publisher, and certain contractual provisions that end up rearing their ugly heads in book publishing contracts so that publishers can avoid having to write a check for each of those things. So publishers try to, if they can, delay or not pay at all monies to authors in various ways. So I'll talk about how they pay and how they try not to pay. So let's start with, and by the way, please, if you have a question, just raise your hand and then Mike will unmute you and please ask your question. I really don't want to sit here for an hour and just hear myself talk. I would much rather have an interactive experience with all of you. Yes, Mike.
Okay, Paul, let's, why don't we have you recognize them and then have them push the space bar so they can speak.
Okay, that works too.
All right.
Okay. Okay, so let's start by talking about advances. Advances are a sum of money which publishers pay in advance, hence the name, in advance of paying royalties. Advances are recoupable against future royalties, but they are not refundable. So even if the book that's published by the author only sells 1 copy to your significant other or your parent, and nobody else buys the book, you get to keep the advance. The only time, and I've had this happen once in the 35 years I've been involved in the book business, the only time you have to return the advance is if you die before you deliver the manuscript to the publisher. So once I had a client, we made the deal with the publisher, and then unfortunately she passed away before she delivered the manuscript to the publisher. So the publisher demanded the first portion of the advance that it had already paid, demanded it back from the author's estate. And we had no choice, of course, because the publisher didn't get what it paid for, so it was perfectly entitled to ask for its money back. But outside of that rare circumstance, and if you're dead, you won't care anyway. Outside of that rare circumstance, advances are not refundable. So advances are paid usually half on signing the contract and half on what's called acceptance, capital A, acceptance of the manuscript. That's the point where you, the author, and the editor have agreed that you've done as much as you can do, that you've gone back and forth, that this final version of the Microsoft Word file of your manuscript is the file is the electronic file that's going to get sent to the printer to print up copies of the book. The publisher has accepted your manuscript for publication. At that point, the second half of the advance is paid. Now, there are a few publishers who do it in thirds. They pay a third on signing, a third on acceptance, and then the last third on actual publication of the book. So the first way that publishers try to, I don't want to use the word screw, but I will use the word delay payment of the first portion of the advance is the issue of signing the contract. The language in a publishing contract usually reads something like, upon full execution of this agreement, or when this agreement has been signed. So here's what happens. Your agent or your publishing lawyer has gone back and forth with the publisher on the language of the contract. The contract is now ready for you to sign. You sign it. Your representative, your agent, or your lawyer sends it back to the publisher so that the publisher can countersign it. And what happens? Nothing happens. The publisher doesn't countersign it. And when the publisher doesn't countersign it, that means that the contract is not fully executed, or the contract has not, quote unquote, been signed. And therefore, because it has not, quote, been signed, it means that the publisher doesn't have to pay the advance. It doesn't have to write a check or send a wire bank transfer by wire to your agent's account. And so that's how publishers try to delay payment of any money to you. The solution to that problem is to change the language to read, within 5 days or 10 days or some small period of time, days, of the publisher's receipt of the contract signed by the author, the publisher will pay the advance. So that takes it out of the publisher's control as to when it actually has to write the check. Is what I'm saying making sense? I'm seeing some puzzled looks. Good. Yeah. So good. Okay. So now, if the total amount of the advance is a small amount of money, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, then it's unlikely the publisher is going to fool around and play games. But if the publisher has to write a check, let's say the advance is $100,000 and the advance is paid in 2 installments, if the publisher has to write a check for $50,000, it's going to delay writing that check as long as possible. So when your representative sends the contract which you have signed back to the publisher is going to sit on it. And you don't want the publisher to be able to do that. So what you do is, like I said, get the language to be changed to, when the publisher receives the contract signed by you, within a few days of that point, the publisher will pay the advance. And if this is one of the situations that if you ask for this, you'll get it. If you don't ask, you don't get it. But if you ask, they'll change the language. This is not something that's controversial or the publisher will have any issue with. Oh, we got more people. Okay. Okay. The second portion of the advance and the third portion of the advance is out of, the publisher doesn't fool around with that. So if the second portion of the advance is payable on acceptance of the manuscript, once the manuscript is accepted, the publisher will write the check or send the money to your agent. By the way, at no point will you ever deal with the publisher directly on anything other than creative issues. On any business issue or money issue, etc., the publisher will not deal with you. The publisher will deal with your agent. The publisher will send a check, every check or every bank wire transfer to your agent. Your agent will take out his or her 15% and send you the balance. You will never deal with the publisher directly when it comes to money. Okay, any questions on advances before we move on to the big one, royalties? Yes, Rusty. Unmute yourself.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
I can now.
Does the size Oh, okay. Does the size of the product have anything to do with how a publisher views the quality or the check amount? Do they expect something hefty for the price?
Okay. Advances range from $0 to $1 million or more. If you're, President Barack Obama or something, where you get a huge amount of money as an advance against your memoir, or Michelle Obama's memoir. She got way more than $1 million, I'm sure. The amount of the advance has nothing to do with the length of the book. If you're asking how long your book should be, it should be somewhere between 60 and 80,000 words. Publishers, by the way, never deal in pages, because pages can be formatted in various ways: single-spaced, double-spaced, half-inch margin, 1-inch margin. The font can be 12 points, the font can be 10 points, the font can be 14 points. So nobody ever talks about pages when we're talking about manuscripts. We talk about words. And the target that you're looking for in a novel or in a nonfiction adult book is somewhere between 60 and 80,000 words. If you're writing for middle grade kids or you're writing for early readers, way less. If you're writing picture books, a few hundred words. But if you're writing anything for adults, your target is somewhere between 60 and 80,000 words. And that's because, in case you're interested, any book over 80,000 words or so would have to be retailed at a price over $30. Just the physical cost of shipping, of printing, I should say, and shipping a book to a bookstore means that the retail price has to be over $30. And for a first-time author, a publisher is not going to take a chance on publishing a book that has to be retailed for anything over $30. If you're J.K. Rowling and you want to write the 9th installment of Harry Potter and you want to write a 170,000 word book, which is what J.K. Rowling did for book number 7, more power to you. Publishers only delighted to retail that book for $42. But if you're a first-time author, they're not going to take a chance on retailing a book for over $30. That's why your upper limit on word count is 80,000 words. 70,000 is better. Any other question on advances before we move on to, yes? Oh, okay, thank you. Any other questions on advances before we move on to royalties? Yes, Dwight.
I'm not trying to set you up with a commercial here, but in view of the technicality of the language in the contract, the writer probably is not going to catch on to what that means.
Neither is your agent. Thank you.
And the other representative. So it would take somebody with a lot of experience and legal expertise to straighten that out, I guess, right?
Right. And I'm about to talk, and when I talk about royalties, I'm going to talk about another gotcha in a contract that most agents don't catch as well. So, Dwight, thank you. You've asked a question that is my personal pet peeve, which is that most of the agents in this country, 80% of whom operate out of New York, a few operate out of LA, a few operate out of other cities like Chicago, Miami, Dallas, etc. But the vast majority of them operate out of New York. They all practice law without a license. They all purport to be able to review publishing contracts and negotiate changes to those publishing contracts directly with publishers. This is a huge mistake for an author. You as an author should politely but firmly say to your agent, thank you for negotiating the deal. You can certainly negotiate the amount of the advance, the royalty rates, which I'm about to talk about, and money issues with respect to the publishing contract, but language issues with respect to the publishing contract should be handled by a lawyer. Now, you don't want to hire your divorce lawyer or your real estate lawyer or some other kind of lawyer. You want to hire a lawyer who understands the book publishing business and who has experience negotiating book publishing contracts. In New York, there are hundreds of those lawyers. In Los Angeles, there are 2. There is a lawyer named Jonathan Kirsch, and there's me. Jonathan mainly specializes in representing book publishers, and I mainly specialize in representing book authors, although it's not exclusive. I have done many deals for publishers, and Jonathan has done many deals for authors, but that's how we are colleagues and have known each other since I got out of law school in 1981. So we coexist happily and refer clients to each other all the time, etc. So there are a couple of other lawyers in this town who say they know how to negotiate a publishing contract. I'm going to remain silent on that point and move on to advances. Move on to royalties. So royalties are calculated based on the suggested retail list price, also known as the cover price of the book. When somebody comes to you and says, I got a 20% royalty, the key thing to ask that person is, of what? The words after the word of are important. All of the big 5 publishers pay royalties the way I just said. And all of the major large independent publishers pay royalties based on the suggested retail list price or the cover price of the book. Some smaller publishers, however, pay royalties based on what they call publishers' net receipts, or something else other than the suggested retail list price or cover price of the book. So in order to talk about this further, I gotta digress just a little bit to talk about how books are retailed in this country. When you walk into a bookstore or into Costco, Target, or Walmart, where 70% of all books that are sold by Costco, Target, and Walmart. When you walk into that store, all of those books are on consignment. They do not get paid for, the retailer does not pay for those books until they have sold to the consumer. And when they sell, the retailer sends a check to the publisher for 50%, 1/2 of the cover price of the book. It doesn't matter what the retailer sold the book to the consumer for. What matters is what's the cover price. So if the cover price of the book is $30 and you, the consumer, have paid $27, you got a 10% discount, you got $3 off the cover price, the retailer still sends a check to the publisher for $15, 1/2 of that $30 price. No matter what the price, no matter how much money the retailer has collected from the consumer, that doesn't matter. What matters is what's on the cover. If it's $29.95 or $29.99, the publisher gets a check from the retailer for $15. Okay? So, royalties typically for a hardcover book are 15% of the suggested retail list price. So when a book retails for $30, which hardcover books typically retail for these days, The author is making $4.50 per book. Some publishers break it up a little bit further and say for the first 10,000 copies, we'll pay you 10%. For the next 10,000 copies, we'll pay you 12.5%. And then for anything over 20,000 copies, we'll pay you 15%. But that's negotiable. These days, you'll find that most publishers pay 15% of the suggested retail list price for a hardcover book. For paperbacks, there are two kinds. Everybody knows there are two kinds of paperbacks. There's the trade paperbacks that you purchase at a bookstore or at Costco, Target, and Walmart. And then there are the mass market paperbacks that you see at the drugstores and the grocery stores. You know, the Harlequin romances, the Danielle Steele kind of books. So for trade paperback books, the royalty rates range from somewhere between 8% to 12%, sometimes even 14%. Sometimes there's a break. So the first 150,000 copies that are sold, the royalty rate is 8%. And then for copies over 150,000, the royalty rate is 10%. Sometimes it's just a straight 12%. And then for mass market paperbacks, it's usually the same break, except that the numbers are lower. It's somewhere between 6 and 10%, with the break, if there is one, at the 150,000 copy mark. Did I go too fast, or do everybody got those numbers? Okay, good. Okay, so, and then there's royalties on audiobooks, which range from 8 to 12% as well. And then the big one, ebooks. Now, for years, agents and publishing lawyers and authors have railed against ebooks. Why? Not because we care about whether the words that we've written appear on a screen or on a printed piece of paper. That's not the issue. The issue is money. Publishers routinely, to every single one of them, pay 25% of the amount of money they receive from Amazon, which is the only retailer of ebooks left in the world. Sony is gone. All of the other ebook readers are gone. If you want to buy an ebook, you'll buy it from Amazon. And Amazon takes 30% off the top. So let's follow the math here. A typical ebook retails for $10. Amazon takes $3 right off the top. It sends $7 to the publisher. The publisher will pay you 25% of that $7. That works out to $1.75. That's what you get. So for that same book, had it sold as a hardcover book, where you would have gotten $4.50, you're now getting $1.75, just because it was sold to the consumer as an ebook rather than as a hardcover book. The good news is that ebooks are now, except for the past 2 months where there's been a huge surge, of course, and people haven't been able to go to bookstores, ebooks are usually, are up until recently, have been less than 10% of the market. And studies have indicated that people who buy ebooks also tend to also buy a hardcover or a paperback version of that same, a printed version of that same book. They take the ebook with them when they travel on the subway or on the train or on the plane, and hopefully not in the car while they're driving. And they have the printed book at home to sit and read a book like we always do. So the ultimate irony for ebooks is that they cost the publisher nothing. There's no shipping, there's no printing, there's no nothing associated with what accountants call the cost of goods sold. There is zero cost of goods sold for an ebook. It is pure profit. So that $5.25 that the publisher receives for every single copy of the book that Amazon sells for it is pure profit. It's not like when the publisher receives $15 for that $30 hardcover book, it costs the publisher at least $6 to print and ship that book. Never mind everything else that goes into running a book publishing business. The ebooks are just icing on the cake. It's just pure profit, and yet they persist in paying authors 25% of whatever they receive from Amazon. That's going to be the next big fight. Years ago, agents used to fight with publishers over things like, do publishers get a piece of the action when it comes to making the movie version of the story, and that kind of thing. These days, the fight is over ebooks. So, yes, Dwight.
Paul, could you just summarize again, not in percentages or anything, but just in words, the difference between a trade paperback and a mass market paperback?
Size.
Size?
Size. The physical size.
Physical size.
A mass market paperback is smaller, and it has a cheaper binding and cheaper paper, and is for the mass market world. And it's designed to last a very limited amount of time, long enough for you to read it, and then it'll fall apart in your hands.
And these are the ones that are sold at a place
Grocery
like
stores, drugstores,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Okay.
And they're 4x6, I believe,
Okay.
versus a trade paperback, which is usually 9x7.
Oh, I had it just reversed. 9x7. Okay.
Yeah, something like that. I don't have a ruler handy, otherwise I'd measure it for you. But anyway,
I got it.
yeah, so that's what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Mass market paperbacks are a very, very small percentage of the market now. The people who used to buy mass market paperbacks are now buying ebooks. They're buying their Harlequin romances to read on their tablets, and then they're buying serious books in hardcover form or trade paperback form, and rarely buy mass market. Mass markets are less than 5% of the total market these days. That was not the case 10 years ago. Yes, Rusty. Yes. Just unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
Is the Kindle and ebooks being
Same thing.
confused by book?
Yeah, Kindle is what I'm talking about. Kindle is the ebook, is Amazon's ebook reader.
Okay, because you can get ebooks directly from authors.
Sure, but Amazon still takes its cut because it owns that format, that ebook format.
Okay.
Even if you
my
self-publish your
confusion
ebook,
is-
Amazon takes its cut. And no matter what.
But if I have an ebook that I have not turned over as a Kindle and I sell it directly from my webpage, I get all the revenue from it.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's because you're a
Sell it by word of
self-publisher. You
mouth.
published it yourself,
right.
as opposed
So,
to having it
ebooks
traditionally
can't
published
sold-
by a publisher.
Right. So ebooks can be sold separately or as a Kindle.
No, Kindle and ebook are
Right.
synonymous. Those mean this. Those are the same words. Kindle equals ebook.
Not what
Because
I mean.
The ebook file that you are selling to the person, that format, that file, the way it's formatted is owned by Amazon, is a Kindle format. Okay.
Because
So-
I can sell, hold on, I have a question here. I can sell my ebook the way I designed it directly to someone who wants to load it onto their computer. It's not Kindle formatted.
Yes, you can, because you're
That's
a
what I'm-
self-publisher.
Yeah,
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about traditional publishers, how they conduct their business.
okay.
So, in a publishing contract, the publisher will list all the various ways that royalties will be paid. X% of the suggested retail list price for hardcover, X% of the suggested retail list price for trade paperbacks, for mass market paperbacks, X% of the retail price of the audiobook, 25% of net receipts for the ebook. It'll list all of those various ways that books are published and sold. There'll also be royalties for special kinds of books like Braille editions and large type editions and that kind of thing. And then after all that list, there's going to be the following paragraph. And this is the gotcha paragraph that I was talking about. The paragraph reads something like this. If the book is sold for other than our usual and customary discount, we will cut the royalty rates above by 1/2. What does that mean in English? It means that if the book is sold to the consumer at Costco, Costco does not pay the publisher 50% of the suggested retail list price. Because Costco is Costco, or Walmart, or Target, they pay 47% or 48% because they can and they do. Because the amount of sales volume that Costco, Target, and Walmart represent to the publisher is huge, and the publisher is only too happy to give the Costco, Targets, and Walmarts of the world a further discount. So that usual and customary discount, 50%, now just got cut by 3%. Let's say Costco's paying 47. Your royalty rates get cut in half. Because Costco is now paying, instead of $15, it is now paying $14.87 or 85 cents or whatever the arithmetic works out to, 15 cents so less than it would otherwise, the publisher would otherwise get. Now all of a sudden, instead of paying you $4.50 for that book, the publisher's paying you $2.25. Okay? If the book is sold at other than our usual and customary discount, we will cut your royalty rates in half. That language, I promise you, will be in every single publishing contract you will ever see from a publisher, and unless you ask for it to be changed, it will be there. And then when you get your agent gets the first royalty statement and you take a look at it and you see that there are 2 columns for sales of that hardcover book. One, sales at the usual and customary discount. 2, sales that are other than our usual and customary discount. You will see that the vast majority of sales, because again, Costco and Target and Walmart represent approximately 70% of all book sales. You will see the vast majority of the sales are from those retailers, and now you're getting $2.25 instead of $4.50 for each one of those books. So the solution to the problem is ask for the language to be changed to read something like, if the book is sold at other than our usual and customary discount, you will reduce the royalty rate by the same amount of the discount. So if there's a 3% cut from 50 to 47, there should be a 3% cut of your royalties. So instead of $4.50, you should get $4.30, or whatever the arithmetic works out to be, so that you and the publisher share or take that cut equally, not disproportionately. We get a 3% cut, you get a 50% cut. And again, if you ask, the publisher will change this language. But if you don't ask, you won't get. Okay, how much more time do we have, Mike?
I see us having about 15 more minutes or so.
15 more minutes, okay. So I'm going to then move on unless there's any questions about royalties. Yes, Lynn? Lynn, we can't hear you. Okay.
She's not muted.
I know that, but her microphone isn't working. Okay. I'm going to give you my email address at the end of this. If you want to send me an email later, by all means, I'd be happy to respond to it then. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to briefly talk about was what rights publishers get and what rights you keep when you sign a contract with a publisher. When you make the deal with the publisher, give the publisher the rights that the publisher can utilize. So you give the publisher the right to print and publish the book, the right to publish the book in printed form, in ebook form, in audiobook form. You give the publisher the right to allow excerpts from the book to be published in a newspaper or a magazine. Those are called subsidiary rights. First serialization and second serialization is the term of that's usually used for those kinds of rights. Certain other subsidiary rights you may want to give a publisher is the right to advertise, to put an excerpt from the book in an advertisement and that kind of thing. Anything connected with the book publishing world that the publisher can utilize, you want to give the publisher the right to do. What you don't want to do is give the publisher the right to do things that the publisher has no ability to do and no financial or other interest in. So you want to hold back motion picture, television, live stage, radio, any other media which tells the story that you've told in book form, which can be done in motion picture, television, live stage, radio, whatever other way, you want to keep for yourself and then sell to an appropriate company which can exploit that right. So you want to keep movie rights and sell the movie rights to your book to Paramount or Warner Brothers or whatever motion picture studio ends up buying it. When you sell this, or when you convey the subsidiary rights, the rights in addition to the right to publish the book, the right to do certain things with the book, like publish excerpts from that book in a newspaper or a magazine, the publisher will pay you 90% of what it receives from that magazine or from that book. If the magazine article or the newspaper article is sold to the public before the book is published. If it's sold to the public after the book is published, it's not nearly as valuable. If it's sold to the public before the book is published, at the end of the excerpt of your chapter, let's say you've written a book on Italian cooking, and you have a chapter in there on how to make Italian desserts. And that chapter is published in Bon Appetit magazine, or Good Housekeeping magazine, or pick a magazine of your choice. The magazine will pay the publisher some significant amount of money, usually somewhere around $10,000, for the right to have that excerpt published in its magazine. You get 90% of that if it's published before, or if the magazine comes out before the book is published, and 50% of that if the magazine comes out after the book is published. It's way more valuable before, because at the end of the article, it's going to say, from the forthcoming book on Italian cooking entitled blah, 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 by you. And so there's going to be a market awareness of your book, and people will run to the bookstore and buy your book once they know it's been published. Just like I'm a Bob Dylan fan, for example, and I know that Bob Dylan's new album is coming out on June 19th, next Friday, a week from Friday. A week from today, from yesterday. And so on June 19th, I am going to run to my local record store and get Bob Dylan's CD, because in advance of it coming out, there's been an announcement that it's coming out. Same thing with books. If there's an excerpt from your book published in a magazine, people will start wanting to get that magazine. So the only way that publishers fool around with that payment of the money, the 90% or the 50% of the money, is instead of paying it to you when they receive it, they'll hold it for the next royalty period. I neglected to mention that royalties are almost always paid twice a year. 90 days, the language in a typical publishing contract is royalties are paid 90 days after the close of the semi-annual period. So if the first semi-annual period is January through June, royalties will be paid at the end of September. If the second royalty payments are royalty period is July through December, royalties will be paid at the end of March, beginning of April. Never, ever bother an agent during the first week of April and during the first week of October. We are busy running to the bank and calculating our cut and sending you your money. That's just an aside. So on the payment of the payment for subsidiary rights, the first serialization, 90%, instead of paying you when the publisher receives the check, the publisher will hold on to the check and pay you when it next issues its royalty statement. Unlikely you're going to get the publisher to change that. The publisher is not going to want to bother sending out a special check during the 6-month period. It will wait and send you your share at the next royalty statement time. Probably not worth fighting about. You got bigger fish to fry, like that other language that I was talking about before. And then finally, the last way that book authors make money from book publishing is by getting your book on the New York Times bestseller list. Now, because the publishers are all located, the big 5 publishers are all located within 6 blocks of each other in Midtown Manhattan, they tend to concentrate or focus exclusively, I should say, on the New York Times. They don't care whether there's a bestseller list in the Chicago Tribune or the LA Times or USA Today or any other newspaper. All they care about is the New York Times. And so if your book makes it to the top 15, one of the top 15 books on the New York Times bestseller list, you will receive a bonus of X dollars. The typical deal is for each week that the book appears on top 15 of the New York Times bestseller list, you will receive a bonus of $5,000, up to a maximum of usually $50,000. So even if the book ends up appearing on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 10 weeks, the maximum you will get will be $50,000. Now, I heard this story not secondhand, but thirdhand, so I have no idea whether this is actually true or not, but it makes for a good story, so I'm going to tell it. Remember the book Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom? That book was on the New York Times bestseller list for 297 weeks in a row. That's a fact. That part I'm not making up, or I have no doubt that that's a fact. His book was on the New York Times bestseller list for 297 weeks. And he got a $10,000 bonus for each week the book was on the New York Times bestseller list. Somebody at Simon & Schuster, I think it was, I forget the publisher, but let's say it was Simon & Schuster, somebody forgot to put that language about the maximum cap. So he got $2.97 million just for having his book on the New York Times bestseller list. Not to mention all the money he got for the sale of the book itself, not to mention all the money he got for selling the movie rights to the book, etc. $2.97 million just for having it on the New York Times bestseller list. We live for that day. Now, the editor who negotiated, or the contracts person at the publisher who negotiated that contract, I promise you is no longer employed by the publisher because they forgot to put that cap on. Makes for a good story. So those are the 4 ways that book authors make money from book publishing: advances, royalties, sale of certain subsidiary rights, namely the first and second serialization rights that I talked about, and bestseller bonuses. We all hope and pray that we make it onto the New York Times bestseller list. Any questions about the book business in general? I realize I may have assumed, as lawyers say, assumed some facts, not an evidence. I assume that you all know what the big 5 are, but you may not, so I'm going to tell you that. In order of size of sales and number of people and number of book published, the world's largest publisher is HarperCollins. HarperCollins is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who owns a little studio on Pico Boulevard here in LA called 20th Century Fox, who owns a little newspaper in New York called the Wall Street Journal, etc. He also owns HarperCollins. HarperCollins, by the way, has many, many, many imprints and has swallowed up many other publishers over the years. It owns Zondervan and Thomas Nelson, the world's largest publisher of Bibles and other religious books, as just one of many, many examples. They are humongous. Second largest book publisher is Penguin Random House. Penguin is owned by the Brits. Random House is owned by a company called Bertelsmann in Germany. The 2 of them merged a few years ago. I wish they would have merged and called it Random Penguins, but no such luck. So they're calling it Penguin Random House. And the Brits and the Germans have gotten together to publish books for Americans. Go figure. Third largest publisher is Simon & Schuster. Simon & Schuster is currently owned by Viacom, which also owns a little network called CBS and a little cable channel called Showtime and a little studio on Melrose Avenue called Paramount, amongst many other things. So that's Simon & Schuster. Simon & Schuster is currently up for sale. My prediction is that Penguin Random House will buy it, but we'll see. Fourth largest book publisher is Macmillan. Macmillan is also a British company. It has imprints like Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, and St. Martin's, in addition to Penn, Macmillan, and others. Fifth largest book publisher is a French company called Hachette Books. The first H is silent. Hachette, Hachette Books. And Hachette Books has imprints that you may have heard of, like Little Brown and Grand Central. So those are the big five. There are lots of other large independent publishers as well, publishers such as Source Books, Kensington, Scholastic for Kids, etc. A typical agent will end up dealing with somewhere around 30 or 40 different publishers, and then some certain smaller ones for specialized kinds of things like Mind, Body, Spirit Books. There's New World Library, there's Hay House, there's Shambhala. Depending on the kind of book that you've written, there's a publisher for it. There are something like 46,000 publishers in the United States. We, like I said, we tend to deal with about 30 or 40 of those 46,000. Most of them is like the old Groucho Marx line. You want to be a member of the club that wants you as a member. You wouldn't want to have your book published by a publisher that wants to publish your book, because not so great. But a good book publisher is worth its weight in gold. All right, I think I'm done, unless you want, you have other questions. Yes, Anita.
I was wondering, I've recently been, especially since being at home, reading a lot of books from the library through Libby.
I don't know what Libby is.
Oh, golly. Okay. When libraries work to have ebooks,
yeah,
it's not one ebook for one borrower or one ebook and everybody can check it out.
Right.
And
there are limits. And John, what's his name from Macmillan, really tried to screw libraries last year and earlier this year, but he's backed off from that. Go ahead.
So I was wondering how contracts with publishers work for writers when their books are being circulated that way versus if a library bought, I don't know, 25 copies of a book versus however many that works out to that 25 people can read at the same time through something like Libby.
So in terms of sales of physical books, printed books, libraries are like any other retailer. They pay the same thing that retailers pay. And therefore, there's no separate column in a royalty statement for sales of books to libraries. It's just sales. When it comes to ebooks, the same thing. They pay X dollars, and those sales are simply counted the same way that a sale via Amazon is counted. The difference for libraries, not for authors, it's all the same. But for libraries, they are restricted by their contracts with the publishers to the amount of people they can circulate that one ebook file that they have, how many people that they can give it to at the same time. How many of their patrons can actually access that ebook file at the same time. Publishers are concerned that they believe, mistakenly, I think, that library copies circulated to library patrons cannibalize regular sales. And that's why they limit libraries in the amount of, or attempt to limit libraries in the amount of copies, ebook copies that can be circulated. But for contractual purposes and for your purposes as an author, Nothing changes. This is all behind the scenes as far as you're concerned and makes no difference. You still get the same amount of money is the answer.
Yeah, I was quite delighted this morning to see that a author friend of mine from upstate New York has a book that through my library is available on Libby. And I had thought about purchasing the book, but I thought, you know, I'll read it first and then I'll see about getting a copy that I'll have for my library, because it's a book that I want to keep enough. So in that way, it's sort of like better than an excerpt, because I get to read the whole thing and then say, aha.
So that example is an example of why the publishers, I believe, are wrong when they say that libraries cannibalize regular sales. It's like, you know, taking a sample of something before you buy the whole thing. Anyway.
Okay.
Right, any other questions, or are we adjourned? Oh, Pauline, yes. You got to unmute yourself, Pauline. You still can't hear you. There
Hi.
you are. Now we can hear you.
I was just waving to Anita. Sorry. I have no question.
Okay,
Yeah, but this was great.
thank you.
I learned a lot. I was taking notes.
Oh, my email address, in case you want to send something to me afterwards, is Paul, P-A-U-L, @ and then it's my full name. My website is Paul, S for Sam, Levine, Lit.com. Paul S. Levine Lit.com. And my email address is Paul @ Paul S. Levine Lit.com.
And Paul, what we'll do is we will get your contact information out via mass email to all of our
thank
members
you.
so that they can contact you. And we thank you for a very wonderful presentation.
My
You
pleasure.
obviously didn't have to study to come up with this.
It's
You know
my
your-
usual, what my wife calls my usual dog and pony show.
Well,
Except we don't have a pony, we only have a dog.
no pony, but your usual dog and pony show was full of knowledge and wisdom, and we
Thank you, I appreciate it.
very much. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, just give me a couple of minutes. I want to give you a tip and a reminder, and that is that writers must be readers. We sometimes forget that. We just get on our writer's hat and we forget to continue to develop ourselves by reading good books. To maximize our potential, we need to be readers first and writers second. Stephen King writes, or rather reads, about 50 books per year. So that's about one a week. And he says he rarely reads a book twice. And the reason he gives is that life is short. So he wants to move on to something new. Ernest Hemingway spent 3 hours per day reading. Now you say, well, why would somebody so accomplished like that spend that much time reading other people's work? Maybe that's how he got where he is or was. And so accomplished writers are very active readers. For me, I chose as a genre at the beginning the thriller. I liked the mysteries and the thrillers. And so I started reading Dean Koontz. And I remember one of his books had a serial killer in this woman's house. She was a grandmother, and he was in the house posing to be a friend of her daughter's. And he was in the kitchen when she found him, and he was fixing breakfast, because that's what he did. And so as soon as you see this helpless grandmotherly type in the presence of the serial killer, you know he's going to kill her. But when is that going to happen? Well, the technique that Dean Koontz used was he would develop the chapter and move the story along, and then all of a sudden the next chapter is a different scene. It's in a different location, different characters, but it's still moving the story along, but you're starting to feel the tension and it's building. And then that next chapter is somewhere else, but we have to get back to the serial killer with the grandmother. And so sure enough, the next chapter goes back there. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, this is the chapter of her demise. But no, it doesn't happen then. It just keeps building. And the next chapter is about a different scene. And it takes maybe 4 to 6 chapters for the murder to actually take place. But by the time it does, you are just on the edge of your seat. You know what's coming. And so that was a very effective technique that I learned to use early in my writing because of reading a Dean Koontz book. And so there are 2 kinds of books you need to read. You need to read books from your genre. You need to know what the top writers successful enough to be widely published, are writing about in your genre. And then you need to write, or you need to read writing improvement books. You need to read about developing the story. You need to read about dialogue, character development, all of these things. All of this makes us better writers. And we need to work at that so that we are advancing in our abilities and in our career. And I want to leave you with one quote. If I'm not mistaken, you know, we read so many quotes from other people, sometimes we forget where they came from. And I want to say this is my quote, but I don't want to be accused of plagiarism. But the quote is, avoid cliches like the plague. Okay, so I'm done. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for everybody who tuned in, and appreciate your presence on this Zoom session. Have a great day.
Great meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Paul. That was wonderful.